A promotional fee has been paid to WBBZ-TV for the following presentation from Buffalo Healthy Living Magazine and our sponsor, the Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers. Where are we since that hateful, racist attack that took the lives of 10 people and injured 3 others on May 14, 2022? This program has engaged members of our community in honest and sometimes difficult conversations to better understand our past with the hope of creating a healthier and just future, all while shining a light on what our community needs to do to move forward. And one of those agencies is the Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers, the BFNC. We're going to find out about this organization in an important discussion. We welcome you to this special edition of your Hometown Health Connection. I'm John DeSciullo. Welcome to our program. Let me introduce our guests. Chandra Redfern is the Chief Executive Officer of Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers, BFNC, a community agency that provides comprehensive, family-focused services to people living in low-income and disadvantaged neighborhoods throughout Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Lockport. Chandra was the first person to appear on our Community Conversations television show last year after a racially motivated shooting that killed 10 black people and injured 3 others. And that was when we first spoke to Chandra and asked her about her in-depth understanding of our community's needs, which revolved around homelessness, lack of jobs, food insecurity, mental illness, and so much more. Now today we're going to take an in-depth look at some of those initiatives that have been undertaken by the BFNC to help people heal and thrive. Our next guest is Sara Taylor, founder and chief executive officer of Positive Steps, and this interesting derivative, BIPOC PEEEEK, a parent mental health project. A Western New York training specialist, community liaison, leader, and renowned presenter on social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Sara works to empower and motivate individuals with disabilities, homelessness, and low-income populations who face barriers to successful employment. Sara also founded the Upstate New York Women of Color Summit and, as I mentioned, the BIPOC PEEEEK Parent Mental Health Project, which we'll have more information on later. Sara has experienced her own challenges in navigating a complex mental health system when she needed help for her own child, which prompted her to address these issues throughout Western New York. Both Chandra and Sara have been honored with multiple community awards for their work, and we welcome them here to their community conversation. So thank you, ladies, for joining us.
Thank you.
And Chandra, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's good to be here.
Chandra, we'll start with you because, last year, as we mentioned, you were here after the terrible tragedy at the supermarket shooting. And so I have to ask, where are we now with regard to discussion about the prejudices, the pain and the fear in the community, the things that you've seen? I mean, obviously people are still traumatized a year after the event. And how are you helping with the BFNC?
So, when we look at where we are right now, I think there's more communication. I believe when I was here last, one of the things I said, it was like a Band-Aid had been ripped off, right? So there were some issues. And so people are communicating more. We've seen a lot more initiatives. I do believe that the state of New York and the city have put a lot of effort into coordinating things. The governor certainly has put a lot of money into East Buffalo in terms of getting services and things up and going. Last year when that horrific act occurred, we hosted several talking sessions where people could just come and be, and we had facilitators who were trained in healing and trauma and mental health. And we've moved on. We've continually had sessions in community. We've partnered with Positive Steps, and we have workshops and seminars, and where people in the community can come to find out what they can do to help each other heal, because it really is a community effort. At BFNC, we've just continued to do outreach in community to find out what the needs are and to try to help people figure out how they get the help that they need.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop after the events of that horrific night and day. It continues on, and we need to constantly be aware of that. Sara, you talked a little bit in the open about the mental health and your intimate knowledge of the complexity and the barriers associated with treatments and care. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, my analogy of navigating the mental health system is a combination between a horror story, Lifetime movie, reality TV show, Judge Judy, Judge Mathis, Jerry Springer Show, Medea Family Reunion. And if you would ask me 5 years ago, navigating the children's behavioral health system was exactly what it is, I would have not believed you. You know, going in and out of psychiatric emergency rooms, having, unfortunately, the police come to your house when your child may be unsafe at one time, treating her and manhandling her, navigating wait lists for 6 months to 6 weeks, and the shame and the guilt and the blame that often a parent endures when you have a child that may be experiencing challenges. You know, we see the data, we see the statistics regarding the suspension rate, we see the data regarding the children that often end up in the criminal justice system that may need some help from a mental health practitioner, or even their family begin to understand what are the behaviors. So me going on this journey up close and personal really changed my life to a level of advocacy where I recognize this is not just about numbers, this is about lives. The suicide rate among Black youth is at a national high, greater than any other demographic. Black males suicide rate, and no one's talking about it. And myself as a parent whose child is, you know, resilient right now, on her way, that journey was often painful and not something that I ever wanted to see another family go through.
So you've helped, you mentioned all those television shows, which to me echoed confusion.
Yeah.
So you've tried to create something that's stable, not only as an advocate for your child, but also to help other children.
Absolutely, because when you look at particularly Black and brown families of color, and the historical perspective of mental health, we really don't have a support system. While we have amazing mental health advocacy organizations, we don't have organizations or high poverty census tracts that really have that advocacy, that peer support specialist specialty like we do now with Buffalo Federation Neighborhood Centers. We are in the neighborhoods having the conversation and also recognizing that cultural perspective and deep-rooted systemic issues that often prevent families from receiving the mental health care that they need.
And families, Chandra, being together in a home is very important too. And I know that you help bring that together with the groups that see you. And you've been there, you mentioned 20 some years at the BFNC.
22 years,
yeah,
yes.
Terrific. And we were just talking earlier about Jan Peters, who was there during my Channel 7 days. And so the organization has been around. Yet last year you mentioned when we were here that homelessness still continues to be probably one of the #1 issues from an economic standpoint or people with mental health conditions. So considering we've had the organization around for a long time, what's next in that journey to help people find their homes?
Well, you know, I think housing. So housing is an issue, and there's an array of, you know, it could be from homelessness to how do I pay my rent, right? There's just a gamut. Or how do I find a housing situation that is safe, right? Because a lot of the housing stock in Buffalo is very old. You know, unfortunately, people do deal with absentee landlords and things of that nature. So there's a few things that we have embarked on. We were awarded a grant from Governor Hochul's office to do outreach and engagement in East Buffalo neighborhoods. And part of what we do is our outreach team is going door to door, and if people allow, they go into people's homes and they do a quick assessment through conversation in terms of what issues they may have. And sometimes those issues are things like property taxes, weatherization issues, absentee landlord issues. And so that team is able to go on the state website or also know of other area resources where someone can get help with housing related issues. One of the other initiatives that we have is we are a vendor for the county. and we have a program known as the Rental Supplement Program. And so that works with individuals who are low income and may be receiving services through Erie County DSS to help them have a supplement to their rental payments so they can actually afford to move someplace and live in a safe, stable housing situation.
Right, instead of getting stuck in a situation that just
Right.
that devolves actually
Right.
over time. We talked not only about housing, but also employment. And talk to me, Sarah, about what somebody who has mental health challenges, whether there's some equitable distribution of employment opportunities, or are they discriminated against? And how do we get beyond that? Because everybody needs to be employed, yet at the same time, sometimes those are prejudices that could result in somebody not being able to sustain their income.
Well, I think when we look at the employment rate for individuals with disabilities, it's at a 7-year high. And we're not talking just the pandemic. We're at 7 years that we know. And we also know that mental health is also seen as an invisible disability often that is not talked about. So when we don't even, not even putting ethnicity, socioeconomic factors, just mental health in general, fearing a disclosure at an employer's office, what that may mean. But we also know that in the peer movement, there are opportunities where those that may have a mental health diagnosis, behavioral health, substance use disorders, that there are employment opportunities. And we have seen an elevation and a new level of respect for the peer movement. Having peers that have work as professionals, that know that journey that you have been on. There's lots of evidence regarding the power of peers and peers in the workplace. So while we don't always openly have that conversation about necessarily a mental health diagnosis and seeking employment, we are able to have some spaces along the profession of mental health and behavioral health, beyond psychiatrists, beyond nurses, beyond clinicians, where there's a profession that respects that you have that lived experience of a diagnosis. And with that experience, you can bring something valuable to the job that no one else can do.
Right, because I would think, we talk a lot about ending the stigma of talking about mental health, yet at the same time, if you go into a job interview, somebody may feel they shouldn't say something because of that stigma that they may still think exists, whereas opposed to saying you have a physical issue, people would be very forthcoming with that. And I also understood that, is there a threshold for minimum wage for somebody who is challenged? Am I right in thinking
there's, the law is what it is
Yeah.
when it comes to minimum wage. However, there are a number of different programs and incentives, trial work period, where someone may be on a form of public assistance and now desires to go to work, but how could they work and really safeguard their income? And there's also employer subsidies for employers that get tax breaks, incentives, there's some bonds. So there's a number of incentives for those that want to work but may have a disability that can also help them still maintain insurance and some level of assistance until they're fully ready to transition. But my hope is, and we know that there are, the minimum wage has been going up, and we need competitive wages.
We need for everybody, absolutely.
For
Chandra,
everyone.
With the BFNC, how do you work to counsel people on career initiatives?
We historically have hired people that live in community, people with lived experience. When you are a community provider, you know the people in the community. So it's a pretty small community. A lot of the people that work for us, their family members have gone through programs, so they're familiar with the fact that this is a place where you can come despite your background and get a second chance. And so that's how we certainly look for people to grow from a career perspective. We have people that, maybe they're returning citizens, and we're able to hire them in positions, and they're able to gain knowledge and education and skills and training from working with the organization. And we've seen people, move to management positions. Likewise, we've had people that have lived mental health experiences. The same thing. Maybe they were in and out of the hospital, but then they stabilized and they come to interview. And some people are very open with their experience, which we're okay with that. And we find value in that. And so no matter if you have a disability or not, at BFNC, we look at each individual's culture, their experiences, to see what value they bring to the organization for the people that we're servicing.
Sara, let's go back to the startup of your organization, which is the Positive Steps and the Parent Mental Health Project. Briefly, give us that startup, and we know you have the issue with your daughter that was a motivator, but how did it all come to be?
Well, many years ago, I was at a conference in Albany, and I recognized that there were trainers and presenters, but no diversity. And so from there, I began to meet with other trainers of color to say, what are some of the things that we can do around professional staff development, regardless of what profession you're in within human services. So Positive Steps, many, many years ago, started hosting conferences all over the region and trainings in professional development. Our BIPOC Peak Parent Mental Health Project started when myself and other parents found ourselves up in the emergency room crying, up there for 24 to 48 hours in our psychiatric emergency units and feeling alone, recognizing that many times as a parent of color, there are several layers of systemic issues that you endure related to racism and heightened levels of disparities. And so we decided, there were a few parents and myself, that we were going to be each other's support system. There was a woman that had a Hispanic background. We had a parent that was from Native American Indigenous, and we began to convene and have conversations about how can we really develop a model that was specifically for parents of color. Not saying that we couldn't get help anywhere else, but it made a difference having that support circle. And we knew right away that we had something, that we were filling a gap, that there weren't many peer parent advocacy, mental health advocacies that dared to go in the hearts of the neighborhood in high poverty census tracts. So for us, it made sense to go to housing projects, to partner with organizations like Chandra's that were really in the neighborhood and not afraid to go in the neighborhood and say, they need help just like everyone else needs help. Yeah. Let's offer support groups in churches and recreation centers. And that's how we started.
It kind of feels like a very grassroots initiative based on your common issue together and sticking to it and growing from there. You mentioned young people. Chandra, let's talk about some of the young people you help with BFNC. Mm-hmm. And where do we stand right now with young people in the community and their sense of hope for the future?
Well, I can't speak for all young people, but I can say that they struggle. I think it's difficult in general just being a young person.
Right, no matter what.
These days. But they really struggle with the things that have occurred. So not only did we have, the tragedy on May 14th, we've had a blizzard, we've had a lot of other things. They've had a lot of loss. And, you talk about the economy, inflation, they hear their parents and caregivers that are struggling and having to deal with those things. And, the other thing is, the opiate addictions, the increase in those, and they are really, really struggling. And what we are seeing is that younger and younger, these children are starting to have these concerns and issues. We have a program called Healthy Kids, which is about nutrition and exercise education for youth that we start at age 8, I think it's 8 to 12, and we meet several days out of the week, and then once a month there's an activity with the caregivers or parents and the kids. But my team said to me, there are a lot of other issues, Chandra, other than just teaching them about healthy food. Like, they didn't expect because we work usually with older teenagers. They didn't expect that children as young as 8 years old would be talking about relationship issues and things of that nature. And so they had to shift and add additional programming because they are trusted. The kids trust them. They talk to them. They tell them things. And they look at that as an opportunity to help shape and influence them and give them some strategies for dealing with risky behaviors or risky situations.
Yeah, very important. And we just did the Excellence in Education Awards, and I know the Buffalo Public Schools play an important role too. Any school,
Yes.
And how that child has a touch point with an influential teacher or somebody that
Yes,
will help mentor them
absolutely.
as well. But now let's move across the age gamut and talk about seniors. How do you help the senior community? Because they feel very vulnerable too.
They are, right? And I think through the blizzard, we saw that
Yeah.
a lot with our seniors. A lot of seniors live alone. A lot of them do. So we have our programs at the Westminster Community House at 419 Monroe Street, and we provide activities, and it's a place for them to socialize. And, a lot of the seniors are just very thankful to be able to come someplace to get a meal,
And socialize.
right? And learn a new skill. Like we have computer classes and things like that. But we
I may
also
go to that one.
we also have a new initiative for caregivers, and it's called. They have a caregiver clubhouse, and it's through the Exhale Initiative, which is a group of foundations that came together and they put some money in because they wanted to provide support for caregivers. So what can happen with that is a caregiver calls a number, which is our number, and they do a quick screening assessment. But the great thing is it provides respite opportunity for the senior. So it's up to 4 hours. There's several, BFNC is one. We have them in North Buffalo, and we have them at Schiller Park as well, because it's a collaboration. And that caregiver can participate in activities that we have there, or they could decide, I want to go home and read a book, I want to go shopping or something like that. So not only are we providing a service for the senior who is going to do activity, meet some friends, but we're also providing an opportunity for the caregiver to get support as well.
Caregivers, key word there, because those folks
Yeah.
are the unsung heroes in so many of those situations. And seniors like what they like, as
Yes, absolutely.
you ladies are not of my age, but you like certain things at a certain age, and you just want to keep that in place so the
Yes.
seniors like their home and their neighborhood. Sarah, let's talk a little bit about the Mental Health Communities of Color Symposium that you recently had. What was that all about?
Well, we know, particularly after the massacre in Rochester, after the horrific incident with Daniel Prude and the police, that we had to do something. We had to do something to specifically address the stigma, specifically to address systemic racism across the mental health system, and really also elevate the need for culturally responsive care. We can go in any community mental health center in this region and see very few therapists of color, very few psychiatrists, psychologists of color. And so our goal was to really elevate the conversation and offer strategies. How do you provide quality, culturally responsive care? How do we address your culture within receiving mental health services? So last year we partnered with the Association of Black Psychologists, the Association of Black Psychiatrists, that wanted to help after the massacre. Many organizations like Buffalo Federation, Best Self, and others began to develop culturally responsive clinical teams that would be equipped to go in Black and brown communities to address the trauma. You can't, as we've seen a hate-related massacre, and take clinicians that know nothing about the community or nothing around culture and deploy them to handle the crisis.
Doesn't seem reasonable. It doesn't make sense.
And so we were very sensitive to that, and hearing from the community, just like we know medically, there's data that shows us medically when there is a physician of color, the outcome and the retention and the level of trust and engagement. And we also know that works with mental health. Everything is not about medicine. Everything is not necessarily about therapy. How do we bring in culturally responsive models such as healing circles, restorative practices? And that's what we began to talk about at the symposium, bringing in regional and national experts in this space that were really ready, that had the research and data talking about what works in communities of color and how do we address it from a long-term strategy and build that trust, have that conversation, and really also develop a workforce that is ready to deliver culturally responsive care.
We only have about a minute and a half left, so I'll go back to where we started in the conversation. Chandra, we were here a year ago after the terrible CHOPS tragedy. Have all of these conversations and all of these other things that have happened in the community helped bring us together? And is this conversation good, and is it continuing at levels that are really helping people?
I think that these conversations are very helpful. I think they're much needed. I can't speak in terms of whether they have helped to bring us together. I think they've helped to set the table for the conversation to occur, and people are coming to the table. I'd like to think that it has brought us together in some ways, but that it still remains uncertain to me if it has done that. I think people are still working through a lot, and like we know with healing and trauma, it just takes time.
Well, you ladies are on the front line. Sarah, your thoughts on that?
We have to continue to be intentional. We can't just at a moment when something like this happens, we have to continue to work. We have to continue to listen to those that are experiencing it. We have to listen, and we say all the time, meet them where they are, but we really have to be intentional and listen.
Well, I appreciate you both being here. Chandra and Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to have information for your websites and phone numbers so we're going to reach you for your organizations. So stay with us, folks, because all of that information will be coming up on the screen as we wrap up this very important community conversation. We thank Chandra and Sarah for being on our show. Here is the important information that you're going to need to connect. The Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers. They're known as BFNC, and that's their website, bfnc.org. That's an easy one to remember. Now you can call them and find out about all the programs that Chandra talked about at 716-856-0363. The number's on your screen. Write it down, bfnc.org and 856-0363. For Sarah, for Positive Steps, you can reach out directly through email at sarataylor@aol.com. There's 2 R's there. And the BIPOC Parent Voice at gmail.com. There's another website, positivestepsny.com, and BIPOCparentvoice.org. And if all of that is too much to know, you can call it a number, and it's 585-435-4414. And of course, we want to thank Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers for sponsoring this program with Buffalo Healthy Living Magazine. And the information for Buffalo Healthy Living Magazine can be found on their website, buffalohealthyliving.com. I'm John DeSciullo. Thank you for watching, and we'll keep these candid conversations going.